A little bit about Costa Rica itself. As you know, it's very dominated by Roman Catholicism, roughly 60% or more in most surveys, sometimes 70%. But it's still what we see there more often than not is true, faithful, biblically preaching churches are rare. But by God's grace, there are 8 Reformed Baptist churches now in the country, so we're very thankful for that. Thankful for the Lord's hand in sustaining those churches. Also, on surveys, you'll see probably 15% of evangelicals that are listed there, but most of them are made up of prosperity gospel churches or oneness Pentecostal churches which deny the Trinity outright. And so it's a difficult religious landscape, but by God's grace, there are some strides being made, some encouraging things that are happening. There I tell people often that the Reformation is finally getting there to Latin America after 500 years, and I think that's what we're seeing by God's grace. You can see that list. I may not be able to get through each one of the points with my voice, but you see how Costa Rica is very strategic in where it's located. They're in Central America. Nicaragua is north, Panama is to the south. And it's also easy to get to these other countries from there, which makes it very strategic. Although there is a religious heritage, there is still a growing secularism within the country itself. We see this especially in the capital region. A lot of the younger folks will say, well, I'm a Catholic, but I'm also an atheist. And so it's not uncommon to hear that. And a lot of the things that, unfortunately, the United States is exporting there. And so pray for that country. Of course, they speak Spanish. That's the language there. One thing that they do boast is a high literacy rate, which makes gospel tracts, printed resources and materials very effective there. And so we're thankful for that. But there still exists a great need for sound theological training within the country, within the region, really all of Latin America. We can say there's a great need there. Even these churches that are truly preaching the gospel, you'll find that many of the pastors are not equipped really to handle the scriptures well. And so even those that are outside of the Reformed Baptist churches, you'll see that great struggle there. Overall, though, Costa Rica is an open door, has an open door for missions, if I can say it that way. It is legal to preach the gospel, to be a missionary there, so you don't have direct persecution or anything like that from the government. But still yet, you'll find the unique challenges with the strong Roman Catholic presence there. And so we give God the glory and thanks that it is open and it's not restricted. And so this does allow for open evangelism, church planting, and even theological education. It is a very secure country compared to the neighboring countries, but it's expensive. A recent report stated that Costa Rica was the most expensive country now in Latin America. And so you do pay for that security compared to these other countries. So that's a little bit about it. The country itself, just as a reminder of where, God willing, will be sent to serve, is the Reformed Baptist Church of Rica, there in the northwestern part. Is everybody okay? Can everybody hear me okay now? Okay. I'm going to try not to exert too much. To get us located, you see here, we're in the northwestern part of Costa Rica, so many of you should know this or have seen this before, in the province of Guanacaste. And Guanacaste itself is about the same size as Connecticut, and so it's a small area, 400,000 or so population, with 2 known Reformed Baptist churches. This is Rica and Bagaces, where Andres and Danielle are. But we're thankful for the Lord's hand there. And some of these pictures, I think Brother Victor took these actually when we were on a trip. But you can see it doesn't look like what a postcard from Costa Rica you would anticipate looking like. This area is much more rural. It's the ranch culture, cowboy culture. It's the Texas of Costa Rica, as you've probably heard me say many times, but still, nonetheless, a very beautiful place. This is the center city of Rica, and if you know Latin American geography, you'll notice that the Roman Catholic Church is right there in the center, followed by a public park. And so where that arrow is in the top right corner, that's where the church is located. And so it's very close to the main streets of Rica, and also very accessible to people who are who don't have transport or who are coming, walking, riding their bikes, taking a taxi, whatever it may be. But this is the city itself. Now, for Liredia, it was founded in 1769. And depending whether you ask a Costa Rican or Nicaraguan, there's a different story about it used to belong to Nicaragua, then it went to Costa Rica. So there are some hard feelings about that. The whole Guanacaste province at one point belonged to Nicaragua. And so that's why it's founded in 1769. Costa Rica was granted its independence from Spain in 1821. And since about 200 years ago, Guanacaste has belonged to Costa Rica. Liredia itself, 80,000 people. And compared to the capital region, it's a lot more Catholic and a lot more rural. The capital region has roughly 3 million people, probably 60% or more of Costa Ricans live in the capital region, so it's very small in its representation. 5 million people total in Costa Rica. I don't think I said that yet. So you have 400,000 of those living in this Guanacaste province. Now here's some familiar faces, and even a couple of us gringos there in the back. Pastor Alpheus Atkins, I think you can see him there, and Pastor Scott Holland. This was one of our January trips, I think the year before last, and we need to update this picture because there's now several more members. And recently, I think it was last week, there were 2 baptisms in Liredia and 2 new members being added to the congregation there. And this is where they meet. If you drive too fast, you probably would miss the building itself. It doesn't look like a church building. At one point, this was a gym, an exercise facility, and they renovated it and made it compatible. One of the blessings of this building itself is having parking. And so parking is very difficult to come by in a lot of these towns and places, and so that's a blessing. Or you'll have to park on the street. And so I think everybody knows here too. If you don't, this building was purchased by a sister church in Wisconsin and given to Liredia, the church there itself. It's been a tremendous blessing to have. So you see the for sale sign. It's no longer for sale. It's been bought and given to the church. Of course, Pastor Adrian, who I will be joining, God willing, in the eldership. And so once we make the move next month, begin the process of elder assessment there. And this has kind of already been taking place a little bit with our trip there last year, staying for a month. And of course, our regular interaction. So one pastor right now, God willing, when I join, there will be the first time the church has had a plurality of elders. And then, of course, here are the deacons, 4 deacons now, brothers that have been a tremendous blessing to the church itself. And this was last fall with the ordination of 2 more deacons and some pastors from sister churches. And I think you guys know this, the history of the church itself, though. It was founded on March 10th, 2019, when I was sent from a sister church in Miramar as the church planter of Missionary. Currently, 24 membership now. I need to update that. But usually on the Lord's Day, 50 or 60 in attendance in the morning and 30, 35 in the evening. So there's a lot of visitors, by God's grace, that are coming now in the morning, even a lot of unconverted individuals. This is where we used to meet. It's a restaurant. One of the deacons in the church, Fernando, his mother and father own this building. They're closed on the Lord's Day, so we were able to utilize this. And you can see this was the Constitution Day. We normally didn't have that many people in there, but many of the sister churches came and were represented, and so it was very tight fit that day, but it was also just a wonderful occasion. I think you can see in this right picture, there's a little window there. It's for the restaurant. That's where the kitchen is, and they usually serve the food there. But just tell you a little story about Fernando's dad. Fernando's one of the deacons. His father, Juan Carlos, he would never come to the services because he said he didn't understand my Spanish. He said, Luke doesn't speak clear. I'm not going to come. And so he would usually just come up with some kind of excuse not to come. But what happened a few months after we started meeting here regularly, he would intentionally start going into the kitchen to prepare things for Monday just so he could hear and listen to the sermon. Pray for him. To this day, he's still unconverted. But since the church has moved, he's been attending regularly, every Lord's Day, to hear the gospel. And we're hopeful, both him and his wife. But it's just a wonderful opportunity to see so many unconverted people come regularly to hear the gospel. And so we're thankful. But pray for Juan Carlos is his name. Yes, that's correct. So here's some more pictures of the building. See how the parking situation goes. You don't want to be the first there because you get blocked in. You have to be the last to leave. So make sure you park toward the end. But these are a few snapshots from various conferences and different things that we've had there. A few snapshots of fellowship. Here's Pastor Alan Dunn when he was there. He has visited the last 2 Januaries. And this was when they first arrived and got into the building. And you notice in the back there, it was open. There were no air-conditioned units. And it would be very difficult. Just think of a church here mid-January not having heat. Just the challenge that would be. In the same way, the heat is so oppressive there that it's really a hot box, and it would get upwards of 90, 95 degrees inside the building. And so Trinity in Roanoke, a couple years back, purchased the air conditioning units, which I think you can see. Yeah, you can see those there. So there's 3 units now in the back, and that's been a tremendous blessing. Just as a recap, a few of the points of the focus of ministry that we'll be laboring in there. I don't think I have to convince this church of the blessing it is to have faithful men laboring as shepherds within the context of the local church. And so the primary work that we will be giving ourselves to is pastoral ministry. I will be giving myself to that, God willing. And so just laboring, as Acts 6 tells us, ministry of the word, ministry of prayer. And I think it's important. I know I've made this point at some time here, so you get to hear it twice. But I think what we see in Scripture, and I heard this from a brother at Reformed Baptist Network, General Assembly, I think it was last year. But we need to understand that at times there's different shapes and forms of mission work. You have, for example, Pauline missions, where he would go every so often, plant new churches, go to new places, break new ground. And then you have what he would call as Timothean missions, where you have a man from a different region who goes and pastors a certain place. And so I think it's good to remember that there are various types of missions and ways that missions can be done. But the point of missions that is always done in the context of the local church. And so that's what we'll be doing here, is laboring there. And I should have said I'll allow for some questions in a moment. So if you have any, feel free to raise your hand, or you can wait till the end. So pastoral ministry, but also secondly, is training men for ministry. And the goal here is to disciple, to raise up and train faithful men who are biblically qualified and spiritually gifted for gospel ministry. And following the model of 2 Timothy 2, our desire is to invest deeply in a few who will be able to teach others also. And this training will include theological instruction, pastoral mentorship, character formation, and practical ministry experience. And with the hope, God willing, that these men would eventually serve as pastors or even church planters in Costa Rica or across Latin America. And this comes in many ways, but always this training we want to see based and founded in the local church. One such example of a vision would be to have, for example, a 2-year internship for a man who would want to come and move to Rica to be assessed by the congregation. As you know, the seminary, which I'll talk about in just a moment, is a great resource for a lot of men, but we still see a great need for men to come and be trained, not just theologically, but also ecclesiologically within the context of the local church. And so if a man would be willing to move his family to Rica to be assessed with the hope of becoming a pastor, be sent out to church plant. And so that's kind of the idea behind that. But connected to that is church planting. Now you see, here's the map of Costa Rica with the provinces. There's 7 provinces. And it was in 2018 when I got a call from Pastor Alexander Leon when we were living in Nicaragua at the time, that he said his prayer and his, if the Lord would allow, would be to see the Reformed Baptist Church in every one of these provinces. Currently, 5 out of the 7 have a Reformed Baptist Church. The only 2 are the ones toward the East Coast, Cartago and Limon. And so still seeing churches planted in these areas. And something important to remember is that most people in these contexts, especially in Costa Rica, are not going to drive more than 30 minutes to go to church, if even that. Sometimes they don't have transportation, so they take public transport. Other times they just try to find the closest church to them. And so what you see is kind of not a different philosophy of church planting per se, but you want to see more local churches planted in these local small towns versus one church here in this big area and then everybody drives to it. And so it's, as I'm sure many of you probably drove a distance this morning, except Pastor Andrew, but many of you drive pretty far. I would say, let me just see, how many of you drove more than 30 minutes today to come to church? Just curiosity. So there's a few. And while there are a few that do this in Costa Rica, it's still rare. And so kind of the philosophy of church planting there is these small towns is planting and establishing a healthy church in each one of them if the Lord so allows. But not just Costa Rica, as well as focusing in on Central America. You can see the other countries there listed. There's 7 of them, 6 depending if you think Belize belongs there or the Caribbean. Belize speaks English, so oftentimes they don't get connected to the rest of Central America, and they're more of the Caribbean, they're more joined in with the Caribbean. But all that to say, by God's grace now, there's one Reformed Baptist church in Guatemala. There's a church plant happening in a town called Chiquimula, Belize. There's a brother, Mark Peterson, who just moved down, who has a desire to plant a church there. There are 2 in Honduras, 1 in El Salvador, 1 by God's grace in Nicaragua, 8 in Costa Rica, and 3, 4 maybe in Panama that we know of. And so that would be also the goal, is not just tunneling just on Costa Rica, but seeing these other countries penetrated. And just to give you another example, in Los Lagos, there in the capital region, they have many men who are from Nicaragua and these other places. And so my prayer is that the Lord would allow many churches to be established and planted. And my dream, if the Lord would permit, would be to see at least 10 Reformed Baptist churches in each of these countries. And so that would be a wonderful goal if the Lord would so bless that. Nicaragua, you guys know that we live there. And you can see on the map where Liredia is. It's pretty close to Managua. We lived in a couple places, but more so in Managua was where we were before we left. And it's a beautiful country. It's the land of lake and volcanoes. So there you go, Gabriel. There's another volcano. But I want to just remind you guys, I did a presentation on this. But Managua itself now has a Reformed Baptist Church by God's grace. That was established this last March. And I think you guys have seen these pictures. But this was our first trip that we took in 2023 when we went down to visit and assess whether this would be a viable church plant. This is where they meet now. Another situation where the church was gifted this building. It was a house, and so they've used the living room area to where they meet. And you can fit 70 people in there if you really try hard. But the good news is they have some other rooms over here that eventually, if they continue to grow, they could knock out these walls and extend it further. I think this will give you an idea. Yeah. So here's a little video so you can kind of see the dimensions and the area itself. It's not that wide. Thankfully, they do have air conditioning there too. But you can see, I'll go here shortly, but you'll see the pulpits down that direction. And this is Brother Daniel. Some of you know. You'll see a picture of him in just a moment. But it's a really good setup right now. And we were down there in March, the Constitution Day. Of course, we went to a hotel banquet room to host that because there were so many people. But for the Lord's Day, we were able to meet here, and many friends and brothers and sisters from other churches were present. So they're very thankful. So this is the group now. As you know, this is the charter members of the Reformed Baptist Church in Managua. And I think I told you guys, Danielle and his family were with us when we lived in Nicaragua. Danielle actually took us to the airport as we were fleeing. And so he's a dear brother, but they've been praying for 8 years that the Lord would raise up a church. And so by God's grace, now this work is continuing. Brother Danielle is now in the eldership evaluation of the church. He's the one in the red tie. Sorry about that. And so pray for that situation. And then another brother right here, the second one to the left, he also has potential desires to be an elder. Brian Zamora is his name. And so just pray for this church. This was Constitution Day. And we had about 135 people, I think, that showed up. And these 11 just wanted to invite anybody and everybody. As I said, we want to show what it looks like to establish a church according to the Scriptures. And so it was a wonderful day of testimony, but also a day of rejoicing. We were there. And so our prayer is that we would see this in many other places, if the Lord would allow. Fourth and finally, is the seminary. CBTS has been coming down doing a module every 3 months, and it's been a tremendous blessing. I think at one point, I'm not sure the numbers now, but at one point 35 men from the 8 churches were either attending in person or online, and so it's a tremendous resource. And these are a few pictures from these modules that they have. But what they're praying for now is Spanish professors, because it's quite taxing to have an entire week of instruction, but also have it translated. And so that's just very difficult. And so that's their prayer, is that they would eventually be able to have Spanish professors and continue that work. And so it's been a joy to see the blessing, the benefit it has been for a lot of these men. And something that I should say is most of these men do not have any formal training. And so this would be the first really opportunity for them to study, especially from a confessional perspective. Okay, so that's more or less those 4 areas: pastoral ministry, training up men for the work of the ministry, church planting, and then doing whatever we can to aid the seminary and help it grow. I've told them I'm willing to see some efforts, and even connecting sister churches from the States to the work here is a tremendous opportunity. So that's it itself. I'll stop there. I think we got time. Any questions or thoughts, comments so far? I'm going to let my voice rest for a minute too. So, I'll back up so you guys can see it. I may have to go back far, sorry. But I think it's important. Plus, I like to talk with my hands. So Cartago is here. So really, San Jose, you'll see in a minute, is right in this area. And really, some people would say part of Cartago is in the metropolitan area. Right now, where Pastor Alex and his church meet, they have probably 20 or so coming from Cartago. The eventual goal is to plant there. And as you'll see in a minute, this is what usually happens, is you got 20 or so folks here. Let's plant a church now because we're out of space. We don't have any other option. Let's send a pastor. And so that would be a desire, a goal of that is to see that, but the need is a laborer to go with them. And so there is a potential in Cartago. Cartago is something, some people say like 90% Catholic. It's where all the pilgrimages go, where all their visions of the Virgin Guadalupe is, if you know those stories. And they do have the big cathedral there. And so it's very tough soil. So yeah, there are there, but nothing other than a Bible study right now is happening. In Limon, they have been contacted by a church there that has expressed some interest in going the way of the Reformation, but I'm not sure exactly where that stands now. But aside from that, there's not a lot that I know. And so, Lord willing, there will be a desire. But you can see, for Punta Arenas is here, the church is actually up here. So, this area really doesn't have a lot of even gospel preaching churches in that area. There's a few that we know of. So yeah, great question. Any others? I think there's some that would be fairly close, depending, kind of their context where they're at. Ezram is one example. We know Ezram. He's a gifted brother. Church in Rica, he's taking classes. And so there's a few cases like that. Some of these men in the seminary are just, I know there's one deacon who just said, I just want to know more about Christ, and I want to learn. And so with no intention to be pastoral ministry, but just to further learn. But I'd say it's small, probably. If there are the men who are not pastors who are in there, probably several years would need to be invested in these men with some direct hands-on training. So the only one that I know of particularly is Ezram with Liberia, and the long-term goal is that he would desire to pastor in some form or even plant a church. But that would be some time. So I think it'd be various to answer your question, so to not answer your question. Yes, brother. Yeah, I think that would probably be the case in a lot of ways, especially when you interact with a lot of the Roman Catholics. They never heard of justification by faith alone, or if they have, they've heard false things about it. And so even we were there just last month, and this was in Bagaces with Andres. We were doing Bible distribution, going door to door. And people did know when we were handing a Bible to them, they said, is that a Catholic Bible or evangelical Bible? They knew they asked that question, but then we would press, say, well, what's the difference? Well, we don't know. Just been told, not to read the evangelical Bible. But a lot of there were some good conversations and general agreement with it, but I think there's still probably a lot who haven't truly heard the gospel. And my prayer is that there are some true sheep that are still in the Roman Catholic Church that the Lord needs to bring out through the preaching of the Word. There are not many indigenous left. There are just a couple thousand in various parts. There's not a lot of those. But yeah, I think so. The Roman Catholic Church there doesn't preach the gospel, and so many have never heard it. And then anything that you speak of, especially against Mary, is very offensive to them. And so you see a lot of the Mary worship that is there and present. So yeah, great question. Okay. So what we're going to do, a flyover, 30,000 foot view, very fast, so hang on. But just want to remind you and introduce some of you to the other churches. And so that's the greater metropolitan area of Costa Rica, of San Jose, And so you see that area, that's where 65% of all Costa Ricans live. There's also 1 million Nicaraguans in the country. And so there's a lot of variance there. But this is the most populated region area. And this, of course, is Los Lagos, the grandmother church. And their pastors, who many of you know, Pastor Eric, Pastor Eduardo, Pastor Ronnie, and then 2 former pastors who were sent out to plant other churches, Pastor Alex and then Pastor Mariano. And so just a few snapshots of their ministry, but one thing I want to note, I think some of you, I don't know, anybody who's been here a while remember Steve Henning from Mebane? Does that name ring a bell? Yeah. So Steve Henning was a missionary, IFB missionary, that was in Costa Rica, I think in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And he was pastoring here in Los Lagos and then started coming to convictions about the Reformation, being Reformed, first Calvinism, and then as soon as he became Calvinistic, he lost all of his support from ascending churches and the IFB churches that were there. And so he went to the church at Mebane asking would they become their sending church, and they agreed. And so Pastor Steve Henning took Los Lagos from the early 2000s through this process of Reformation that led to them eventually constituting as a 1689 Reformed Baptist Church. This was after Pastor Steve Henning's death. He died in 2009. He had cancer and went to be with the Lord. And this was just a members' meeting, very small for many years, but this is a recent annual photo of Los Lagos. And so the Lord continues just to bless this congregation. And keep in mind, this is a picture after 2 other churches have been planted where 20 plus twice have been sent out because they keep running out of space. And so it's just the Lord's mighty hand there. Many are being converted, and there's just a great hunger in this land. And so here's one church plant, which I think you know, Alajuela, Pastor Mariano. Same thing, that they were, I don't remember the exact number, 25 that were in Alajuela. And if you fly into San Jose, you fly into Alajuela. And same thing, they wanted to plant a church in this area. Pastor Mariano was eventually selected to become their pastor. They've had to move now twice because the first 2 buildings, they kept getting filled up. They ran out of space. They're finally in one. I think it's going to hold them for a little while. But this is the members now. And then as of recent, the Lord has also given them another elder, Pastor Arles, who is from Nicaragua, and then a deacon as well. And so the Lord has blessed that. Same thing, San Jose. This is the capital region. This is the area. It's 3,500 feet, surrounded by 10 to 12,000 foot mountains. So very different than Liberia. This is where the postcards come from, all the rainforest waterfalls, all that. But it's a beautiful area, a huge metropolitan area. But San Jose, the church there, these were the charter members that were sent to plant in San Jose, where eventually Pastor Alexander Leon became the pastor. And now this is where they currently meet. And yes, that is Mandarin there on that building. I think some of you remember the story. This was a building that was built by Taiwanese diplomats in the 80s and 90s that had a church there in Mandarin. Eventually, Costa Rica sided with China instead of Taiwan. So these diplomats were forced to leave, but a lot of their descendants stayed. And for many years, there was a Mandarin church there that met. And eventually, there was a Costa Rican brother who had married one of these Taiwanese ladies. He started becoming convinced of Reformed things and reached out to Pastor Alex and said, will you plant Reformed Baptist Church here in this place? And so they attempted to do one there. It's in a town called Zapote. But eventually what happened is the church in San Jose just moved there. And this is now the church in San Jose. This is the Lord's Day. Again, you can see those seats are filling up very quickly. And then Pastor Alex, whom you know, who was here, probably been 2022, I guess. And then Pastor Randall. And then also recently, they've gotten 4 more deacons. I think there's 6 total now for the church. Tremendous blessing, and this is where the annual pastors' conference is every January as well. And this was the pastors' conference from last year. And you can see many men. For years, it was just a lot of Costa Ricans. I think this year we had a brother from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic. We had from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. Came. Many places were represented. So very thankful. And then Pastor Jeff Johnson from Grand Rapids will be preaching the pastors' conference this coming January. So very thankful. A few other churches, you may not know some of these names, but just similar stories. This was more of a Pentecostal church, from what I understand, that went the way of the Reformation. Pastor Diego, I think Pastor Wilmer now is a pastor there too, in a town called Grecia, so Greece, there west of San Jose. And then you keep going about an hour west, you get to a town called Orotina. I think a church I think you're very familiar with. Similar situation. If you remember Pastor Jose Marchena, who went to be with the Lord in March, but he took this church on that same course, and as he told me in an interview, that he preached a false gospel for 23 years. They were in the prosperity gospel. And it's very interesting, going back and listening to that interview that I did with him in 2023. He said during COVID, something was just eating him alive inside about what he was preaching. And he just couldn't shake it. So he said, I just locked myself in a room for 6 months, opened my Bible, and when I came out, I realized I wasn't preaching the Word of God. And so he went to the congregation and said, look, I've been preaching a false gospel to you guys for 23 years. Will you forgive me? And during this time of his conclusions, he told the denominational head, whatever it was, in these prosperity gospel churches, and he said, look, I don't believe what I'm preaching anymore. I don't believe this. And the guy said, well, he said, I don't think you're one of us anymore. He says, you're a Reformed Baptist. And he's like, well, what's that? And so then he says, he starts searching what a Reformed Baptist is and finds these churches, finds Pastor Alex, finds Adrian. And if you guys remember, some of you weren't here, but in 2021, when Pastor Adrian was here, staying at our house, he got a phone call from Pastor Jose Marchena, and they spoke for about 3 hours about what this means. And so he took this church through the process of Reformation. In 2023, they constituted the Reformed Baptist Church. And, in the Lord's difficult providence, he went to be with the Lord in May this year. But by God's grace, there is another pastor, Pastor Eric Gamboa. That's his family. And he's continuing to labor there. And this was last month. I had the joy of being at the ordination of Pastor Jose Marchena's son, Amos, into the diaconate. And so pray for this church. They're still suffering. Lots of tears were shed that day. But they're thankful and grateful for what the Lord has done and His sustaining grace. Pray for Pastor Eric. He expresses his insufficiency for that task, and he's just feeling overwhelmed because Pastor Jose Marchena took the large portion of the work itself. So just pray for them and your brethren at Orotina. Finally, Miramar, I think you know this church, Pastor Jose Vargas, and this was the church we were first members of when we came to Costa Rica. Still, they only have one pastor and one deacon, and this is just a snapshot from one of our ministry trips there. And this was at that conference. This was all the officers of every church that was represented. And so you see some of those, and then Pastor Jose Marchena was there in the back. I think he was looking at Frank. You see Dave Scheller there, Frank's there, Pastor Allen's there, brothers from Guatemala, different ones. Pastor Scott Hollins over there. So it was a blessing to be there. And this is a conference that happens every January. So one of our pastors may have to come and preach that now. So and then Bagaces, you know Bagaces with Andres. And we were just down there and had a wonderful time of Bible distribution, evangelism with the congregation there. And I think, you probably showed all this, brother, but just the new renovations for the building has been a tremendous blessing. And these are even dated from what they are. But then, of course, you know Pastor Andres and Emmanuel and then their family. So keep praying for them. Just pray for fruit from these evangelistic works. Even one who we had the privilege of sharing the gospel with, doing the Bible distribution, has started attending the church, and pray that they would stay as a family. And when we went, I don't know if you told this story, but if you did, you guys get to hear it twice. So we went to this family and we broke up, so Sam wasn't with us, and I was translating for Pastor Chris Law from Wisconsin. In the first house we went to, we asked if we could share a gospel message with them and hand them a Bible. Said sure. And so we were talking, and you could just sense they were pleased that we were there. You could see some connections. And then another lady said, "Hey, well, I'm just visiting here. Can I have a Bible too to take back to my house?" And then another one said, "Can I have one to take mine?" And so by the end of it, we gave 4 Bibles away because these ladies were just distant family who were visiting for the day, got to hear the gospel and take the Bible back to their homes. So just pray for that continued fruit. I know Andres' desire is to have a Bible in every home in Bagaces, and I don't know how many that would indicate, probably 5,000, probably so. That's what I would guess. But then you can see the loop being closed, and back to Liberia. Bagaces is 25, 30 minutes away, so very close. And just pray even for these two churches, their relationship to grow and to labor together more and more as the only 2 Reformed Baptist churches in this part of Costa Rica. And so just continued prayer request, more laborers to be raised up. And we don't just mean in Costa Rica. I pray for that in Virginia, here, across the world. By God's grace, financial provision has been met, so we give thanks to the Lord. Continued preparations, the closing of the houses on Tuesday. And then, of course, here you can pray for this congregation and the congregation in Costa Rica and our family that moved. So got through it. But any final questions or thoughts, comments? Anything unclear? I know that's a lot of information. Yes? Let me pull this back up, sorry. So basically, this is like downtown. We're like right here-ish. 5 minutes away from the church, so it's very close. So, yes. Okay. All right. Yes. Amen. Amen. Yes, you're welcome. We're very thankful. Okay, let me conclude in prayer. If you have any more questions, come. I see we're getting a few back here waiting, so let's pray.